Gulp down all the pills at once.
The principal threat of the drug war and international security has to do with its role in stirring up large levels of violence and crime and corruption. In the United States now, people ask, what are the principal national security challenges in terms of violence? And, there's three: Afghanistan, Iraq, and Mexico. Now, Iraq appears to have very little to do with the drug war. Afghanistan, where roughly 50% of the gross domestic product, the GDP, is involved with illicit opium and heroin, and where you have the money funding both the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, as well as all sorts of other things. Obviously it plays a role in the national security situation.
In Latin America, we're dealing with countries that are traditionally very weak states. You have very weak institutions. The model imposed by Washington on the region has further weakened civilian institutions by creating a strong role for military forces who should not be involved in domestic law enforcement, by prioritizing military and police assistance, providing very little support to justice sectors.
When you pour billions of dollars of military aid into these countries, then countries are going to use that money for violent means to suppress what peasants do very naturally.
One of the serious problems with the war on drugs is that it diverts enormous amounts of money into the hands of a lot of very unsavory people. So the cartels who reap all the profits from this often use that money to corrupt the judiciary, to corrupt the police, and to corrupt local politicians. So you have a dramatic destabilizing effect of illegal drug profits in some key producer countries, whether it's in Latin America or whether it's in Central and Southeast Asia or wherever it may be.
Organized crime functions via its ability to corrupt institutions across the board. So what you find is a situation where the police don't investigate and judges don't convict, which is why you end up with a huge impunity rate for drug traffickers across the region, and this further weakens the state.
Because of increased border security in Europe, cocaine traffickers just simply shifted their supply routes into West Africa. There's one country in West Africa called Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea-Bissau in 2009 had a GDP of 800 million, so it's one of the poorest countries in the world. It has an archipelago of islands and has essentially no government structure. There's no effective police force, there's no effective military, and recent estimates suggest that $1.8 billion worth of cocaine wholesale is annually going through Guinea-Bissau.
The illegal drug profits will often flow into the hands of insurgents or terrorists or other militias and military or paramilitary groups. And in doing so, what you're effectively doing is fueling conflict in already unstable conflict zones. You're providing a river of money that is used to buy arms and to fund armies and to fund wars and conflict. So there are a number of countries where there are civil wars that are actively being funded by profits that are a direct result of the war on drugs.
Central America, Guatemala, Honduras almost make Mexico look tranquil by comparison. What we saw in the past in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, the Sendero Luminoso. Look in Southeast Asia, so often the drug prohibition is empowering criminals, organized criminals, unorganized criminals, terrorist organizations, political insurgencies.
Look what is happening, for instance, in Afghanistan. They're producing far more heroin in that country than they did before we started our 9-year-long war in that country. Far more. And today, we have our soldiers over there that are burning poppy fields and spraying poison on it. And every time they do, they turn that particular farmer back toward the Taliban. Because what we're doing is we're destroying their livelihood. they estimated it would have cost $600 million to buy the entire crop. Instead, that very year, we paid $780 million to spray poison on it, and they still had the largest bumper crop in history. And the year after that, larger, and the year after that, larger.
We focus on the role that criminal organizations play in supplying illicit drugs. On the other side, we also consider supply in terms of production. A solution must be taken. If in certain cases alternative development might be the most effective long-term solution, or if forced eradication is the only solution. If we look at the areas, particularly Colombia, where very focused and well-developed and sustained policies have been developed in order to bring development to the rural areas, we must say that they do work.
UNODC data demonstrates that while seizures in the Andean region, for instance, have increased as increased interventions are applied to try to stop coca production in that region, the levels of cocaine availability, measured through price and purity, demonstrate that in consumer markets, such as Europe and the United States, that essentially there has been zero impact.
They have managed to kind of fill their reports with the odd victory, and that gives the impression that something might be working. It's not. When they cut off one trade route, another trade route appears. When they fumigate a particular area that's growing coca, it just gets planted elsewhere.
In the case of Colombia, it has been a very long-standing aerial spraying campaign. In the case of Peru and Bolivia, manual eradication during the past 30 years. The amount of hectares cultivated have remained more or less stable. So we can easily say that these campaigns have failed.
Small farmers grow coca because they have no other economic alternative. And you can eradicate their coca all you want, unless they have something else to provide them with income, they're going to replant coca. And that's what has happened over and over and over again across the region.
The economical impact on these families and on these thousands of peasant families is the biggest cause of poverty in these rural areas. There has been no serious attempt to involve farmers' organizations in defining their own destiny. Bolivia is now the first country that has started to find ways to eradicate voluntarily.
Alternative development, as I was saying before, is offering farmers an alternative production of coffee, organic coffee, that is also marketed with a brand or cocoa or other produce. In Afghanistan, as far as I can remember, one of the most successful potential product is cultivation and marketing of saffron.
Alternative development policies have been limited, have worked in some areas, but in most areas it hasn't. Something like 5 cents per gram of cocaine will go to the farmers. So, but still, within their reality, this is a lot of money, and it is a secure market they can always count on.
How would you explain to someone that it's making $2,000 a year working in the drug industry, or even $1,000 a year in the drug industry, and it's putting their kids to school? How are you going to tell them, stop? Why don't you grow corn instead and make 200 and forget about your kids going to school? How do you say that? How could you say, I am going to develop programs and I'm going to give you money for you to move away from coca growing, when at the same time I'm spraying your land and your ground, and the next day you're not going to be able to grow anything? You're going to cripple Latin Americans with these double standards of policies that at the end of the day are going to cause more poverty. They're going to expand